Hi, everybody. Today we're going to finish up our sensory lecture. We stopped talking about the visual senses previously, but I do want to spend a couple minutes going over some of the information we covered last time as a review, and then go ahead and get started with our auditory sense. So last time we talked about the main type of cells that gives us our sense of vision, called photoreceptors. And these photoreceptors have two main types. There are your cones and they are your rods. Cones are the ones that are associated with a color vision. They need lots of light, and they therefore are least sensitive because, again, they require a lot of input from the light. Rods, on the other hand, give you your color in dim light, and they are not the perfect vision, but they are identified as most sensitive. And again, because the reason is because they need very little light to get activated. Now, in terms of the path of the signal coming from your eyes, if you're looking at the posterior lining of the retina, we have the first layer, which are, again, would be your rods and cones. And then, goodness gracious, sorry guys, would be your rods and cones. And then the second lining of that would be the message that gets passed on to the second line of the cells, which are going to be the ones I'm depicting in black. These would be the cells we call bipolar cells. And then bipolar cells are going to pass their message to the third line of cells, which are these kind of large cells called ganglion cells. And kind of depicting the ganglion cells, sorry. These are your ganglion cells. Now, if I take the axons of these ganglions and kind of bring them all together and take them out of the back of the eye, so these are the extensions. What we're forming, this is called the optic nerve. Now, understand that the region where the optic nerve comes out of the back of the eye, which in this case would be right here, this region, you won't have any photoreceptors, right? Because the axons of the ganglions are coming out. So this is known as the optic disc, which is also known as your blind spot. Again, the reason it's called the blind spot is because it's the region where you basically won't have any cones or rods or photoreceptors. No photoreceptor means no vision. And if you guys looking through the path of the vision, again, rods and cones is what you start with, which passes it to the bipolar, pass it to the ganglion. Optic nerve, I'm going to keep reminding you guys, these are the axons of the ganglion cells. And they become your optic chiasm, which is basically where the signal crosses over for the concept of contralateral, and then eventually ends in the occipital lobe of the brain. So moving on to your sense of vision, which is our last sense we're going to talk about. Your sense of auditory, not vision, sorry. This part is, your ears are broken down to three parts. What we identify as external or outer ear, what we identify as middle ear, and what we identify as inner or internal ear. So looking at each part, you have the external ear, which is made up of pinna, and your ear canal. The ear canal has the proper word called external auditory meatus. Sorry. Your middle ear is actually separated from your inner ear by your eardrum, or the your middle ear separated from your external ear or outer ear by the tympanic membrane. Middle ear is made up of 3 bones. The first bone that is directly contacting your eardrum called malleus. The second bone in line called the incus. And third bone, which is called the stapes. And the inner part of your ear is made up of 3 structures. These half circle structures, which are called semicircular canal, semicircular canals. There are 3 of them. The midsection, which is called the vestibule, associated with your sense of balance, and the shell of your snail, this twisting labyrinth, which is called the cochlea. So the main function of your outer ear or external ear and your middle ear is to pass the vibrations of the sound into the last part of your ear or your inner ear. Inner ear, however, on the other hand, has 2 main functions. One is your gain of ability to hear, and the second one is your sense of balance and the positioning of the head compared to your environment. So let's take a look. Outer ear or external ear is made up of pinna and the auditory canal, which is the same thing as the external auditory meatus. Your auditory canal is contain modified glands, which releases airwax as well as oil glands. The goal of this is to basically make sure that the dust and debris and insects do not get access to the internal components of the ear. You have the second part of the ear, which is middle ear, separated by this membrane called the tympanic membrane. Again, a lot of times if I want to describe tympanic membrane, I think about it as the surface of a drum. So the surface of the drum is your tympanic membrane, and when the tympanic membrane vibrates, it passes those vibrations to the bones that are inside your middle ear, in order being malleus, incus, and stapes. In this picture, you can see these bones, so compared to a dime. So here's your malleus, incus, and stapes. These are the smallest bones we have in our body, and you can see them. This is adult bones, not a child. So again, they are really, really small. And if you notice, if you look at your stapes, which is kind of like a stirrup, it has a point of connection to the inner ear, and that point of connection is called the oval window. Right underneath the oval window, you have an indentation that is more circular, and it's called the round window. So oval window passes the vibration into the inner ear, and round window picks up any of the extra vibration and take it out of the inner ear. So if those vibration again stays inside the ear, it causes problems with your hearing, right? You hear a lot of additional sounds. So any extra vibration that enters the inner ear needs to be able to get out, and they get out through your round window. Now, inner ear, again, 3 structures. You have your semicircular canals, and there are 3 of them. There is an anterior one, there is the posterior one, and there is a lateral one. So these create the, again, positioning of the head. This is when you move your head. The anterior one is when you move your head, yes, front and back. The posterior one is when you move your head, no, so side to side. And the lateral one is when you tilt your head to the side. So these three positions, the positioning of your head or those type of movements are figured out by the semicircular canal. Vestibule is not only concerned with equilibrium, but it also can tell you about the acceleration. So if you're, let's say, sitting in a car in terms of linear acceleration, right? If you're speeding up, moving forward or backward, that's the part of the ear that can tell you, vestibule. Also, if you are in an elevator and you're going up and down, the motion of the elevator, the gravitational acceleration is also measured by your vestibule. Again, if there is any problem with the fluid balance inside the vestibule or semicircular canal, which I talked about before, then that causes problems with your equilibrium, or it gives you the feeling of vertigo. The last part of the ear is the shell of your snail. This is called the cochlea. Cochlea is extremely important in terms of your hearing. The part of the ear that gives you the ability to hear are specific cells called hair cells. And what is the job of these hair cells? Is they take vibration of the sound and convert it to electrical impulses. So if you're looking up to this point, when we were talking about the external ear and the middle ear, all they have done is they took the signal and passed it from one place to another, right? Now, when it gets that signal, gets that vibration, gets into the inner ear or the cochlea, those vibrations are going to be transferred to cells called hair cells, and those hair cells are going to change those vibration to electrical impulses. Now, electrical impulses does get picked up by the nerve that comes off of the cochlea. So if this is your cochlea, this nerve that is coming out of the cochlea, called the cochlear nerve, it is destined for the temporal lobe. So temporal lobe is where you have the ability to hear sound and then make the distinction. So it is important, but before it gets to the temporal lobe, it passes through the thalamus. So kind of looking at the structure and me labeling the structures on the picture for you, you go through the pinna, through the auditory canal, vibration of the tympanic membrane, which causes vibration of malleus, incus, and stapes. Message goes through the oval window and reaches your cochlea. Cochlea takes that message, those vibration of the sound, and convert it to electrical impulses, which passes through the cochlear nerve, goes to the thalamus, which is number 9, and eventually ends in your temporal lobe for your ability to hear. This is basically what we just talked about, so hopefully this will make sense. Now, inside your ear, connecting your ear to your pharynx or your throat, you have another tube, and this tube is referred to as the eustachian tube, or it may also known as the pharyngeotympanic tube. So pharyngea, tympanic tube. This tube is basically, again, connects the throat into the middle ear. So this tube you see right here labeled as eustachian tube. So what is the goal of this tube? Is if you have a pressure, here is, let's say, a pressure that is normally about 760 millimeter of mercury. So this pressure in the middle ear needs to be equal to the 760. So how do you balance it? The tube that connects to your mouth, make sure that the pressure inside the middle ear is also 760. Now, the typical thing you notice is when you start to go up the elevation. So let's say you are in a plane and the plane is ascending. What happens to the pressure outside? It drops to, let's say, I don't know, 740, okay? Now the pressure here on the external ear is less than the middle ear. So that fluctuation puts a lot of pressure on the tympanic membrane and therefore prevents it from properly vibrating. What is the solution if you hear you have that trouble as the plane ascends? They tell you to either chew gum or yawn or hold your nose and take a breath. Anything that helps this tube open up and balance the pressure of the inner ear to also 740. So exposing that to the external environment, making the pressure in both sides, inner and outer aspect of the ear equal, and releasing the pressure from your eardrum or your tympanic membrane. The way that you want to think about it is when that pressure exists and the pressure is not equalized on either side, you have a difficult time hearing. But as soon as your ear, quote unquote, pops, all the sounds all of a sudden become clear because then your tympanic membrane can vibrate normally, and therefore it allows the vibration of the sound to effectively be passed through the middle ear and eventually into the inner ear. The other thing that I want to talk to you guys, and it's not written on the PowerPoint, but I do want you guys to know, is the eustachian tube also in children is not as steep, so it has less of an angle, which makes the infection that is in the throat down here can find an easier way coming up to the middle ear. So a lot of times you will have built up of infection in the middle ear, and that pushes pressure on the tympanic membrane. So if there is way too much pressure because of a buildup of pus inside the middle ear, the tympanic membrane will break, allowing that pus to be released through the external auditory canal and out of the ear. Can this be fixed? Yes. So especially if it happens in children, the healing is pretty rapid after taking out medication and taking care of the infection. In some cases, if the child is very susceptible to ear infection, they actually implant a little structure that creates an opening inside the an actual continuous opening inside the tympanic membrane. So let's say they have an opening. So if there is a buildup of pus or infection in the middle ear, that can easily be drained from this opening, and therefore the eardrum will not pop. And as the person starts to age, this structure will eventually fall off on its own and the tympanic membrane will heal itself. So eustachian tube, we already talked about it, and I believe that's about it. If you guys again do have any questions, please write them down and I will discuss them with you during my office hours. We will discuss our next lecture for unit 5, starting with digestive system. So keep tuned.